Hello and welcome everyone to our fourth and final lecture in the series on the magical seals of King Solomon. In our first three lectures, we followed Solomon's seal from legend to laboratory, from the wise king's ring and demon commanding authority through the Clavicula Solomonis, where pentacles crystallized as the ritual centerpieces, and out into the street and clinic where iatrochemists rebranded, debated, and domesticated them. Today, we zoom in on a single case, a Jewish handbook for making pentacles. Our aim is to see how the threads from earlier lectures, Solomonic legends, demonic instruments, and astrological timing are woven together here. We'll meet the authors, step into their workshop, and ask who they were. What exactly did they write? How did they understand and organize the pentacle knowledge they collected? And do their Jewish pentacles actually differ from Christian ones? Or only in style and framing? To answer this, we'll follow two almost unknown figures, a rabbi and his student, and let the text guide us. By the end, we should have a clear view of how they adapted a shared magical repertoire to their own world, and what that tells us about creativity and intercultural encounters in early modern Jewish magic. To understand their project, we need to meet the people behind it. The record is patchy, but there is enough to sketch their lives. The first protagonist of our story is Yehuda Peretz, who was born in Ragusa to a family with Moroccan roots. As a young man, he turns up in Venice, where, after the death of his friend Isaac Cavaliero, he served as preacher to the city's Ashkenazi congregation, roughly between 1709 and 1711. A decade after leaving the preaching position, we meet him again on the move, traveling through European cities, bringing several books to print, and eventually settling for a time in Amsterdam. There, in 1722, he finished assembling a Hebrew version of the famed ritual magic handbook known across Europe as the Clavicula Solomonis, or, as Peretz calls it, Mafteach Shlomo, the key of Solomon. That Hebrew key is not a simple translation. It is a carefully edited manuscript stitched from multiple sources, Latin and vernacular, then translated into Hebrew. In the margins and between the lines, Peretz leaves the fingerprints of a working editor, abridgments, substitutions of Christian prayers for Jewish ones, occasional retention of non-Jewish elements, and cross-references to parallel recipes. In several places, he even tags his own interventions with initials YPY, Yehuda Peretz ben Yosef, a trail I've used in my research to identify him. In short, Peretz wasn't just copying. He was building a Hebrew clavicula that a Jewish practitioner could conceivably read and use. Peretz's polyglot skills made that possible. He read Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese, and compared his Hebrew-based text against non-Hebrew exemplars, specifically Spanish and Italian copies of the clavicula. His student, Isaac Zekli, or Zekel, added Dutch to the pair's working language. The result is a manual that moves comfortably between words, translating methods and terms while signaling where meanings shift. Their partnerships comes fully into view in London in 1729. There, Perets and Zekli sat down together to produce a new copy. Zekli had the pen, you can see his handwriting here, but the manuscript preserves the joint method. Zekli routinely inserts in parentheses the very identifications and glosses that Peretz had earlier written in the margins of his own copy. Both men explicitly acknowledge consulting non-Hebrew sources and aligning them with the Hebrew mafteach they possessed. In his manuscript, Exactly tells us he copied the book in London from the second copy held by Rabbi Yehuda Peretz, confirming that Peretz had multiple exemplars in hand. What did that London manuscript look like? First, it is very detailed. Exactly flags smudged letters, missing words, even stray ink drops he found in his model copy, and he corrects them in line. Second, it is cautious. He prefaces the book with a warning to readers to consult Talmud and legal authorities before attempting any recipe. And he explicitly censors at least two operations he deemed out of bounds for Jews. One that required a sacrifice to Satan, and another involving the offering of a white rooster. Third, and most importantly to our discussion, the London manuscript expands the project. Exactly appends a substantial Sefer ha-ďOtot, Book of Signs in Hebrew, a planetary pentacle collection complete with magic squares and rearranged inscriptions, and he adds a compendium of charms plus an A to Z angel name glossary. Together, these moves make the Hebrew clavicula both more legible and more self-contained for Jewish readers. Just as striking is the pair's transparency about sources. They cite an Italian key, a Spanish book, and other texts they used for checking and refinement. Peretz had already produced a Hebrew clavicula in Amsterdam years earlier, and the London work extends that editorial program. In places where the broader European tradition prescribed Christian prayers, like the Pater Noster, the Hebrew redaction substitutes short prayers. Elsewhere, it preserved Christian traces, like the sign of the cross, without pretending those traces never existed. The point is not denial, but domestication. The two are making a Jewish clavicula that knows exactly where it comes from. Who was Isaac Zachary beyond the pen? The London manuscript paints him as a learned, self-aware student, steeped into Talmud and medieval Kabbalah, writing in a clear Ashkenazi hand. Archival materials place him in the Netherlands across the early 18th century, married with children and comfortable in multiple languages. His editorial voice is consistent, cautious about practice, precise about text. He is not out to stir up a magical renaissance. He is out to make a complicated book workable and responsibly framed for his Jewish community. My research also spots a controversial thread in Peretz's circle: Sabbatian connections. Peretz was close to the Sabbatian preacher Nehemiah Chayun, and I suggested that an earlier, now lost source may have been written by Chayun himself. Whether or not that identification stands, the broader picture is clear. Peretz operated at a busy crossroads where learned magic, pietistic experimentation, and Sabbatian speculation sometimes overlapped, and he brought that cosmopolitan toolkit to the Hebrew clavicula. If we step back, the plot is simple and human. A rabbi from Ragusa and his Dutch-based student set out to make a usable Hebrew Key of Solomon. They spread Latin, Italian, and Spanish exemplars on the table. They collated, translated, trimmed, and added. They argued with the sources when ethics demanded, and they left behind two interlinked manuscripts: Peretz's Hebrew clavicula and Zechariah's own carefully expanded copy, a book they made together. Their legacy isn't a sensational story of magic. It's a quieter tale about editing, judgment, and cultural translation. How two Jews in the early 18th century reworked a pan-European manual into a Hebrew handbook so the readers could recognize the tools, weigh the risk, and, if they dared, turn the Solomonic key. Now, let's turn to the content. Zachariah's manuscript reproduces the introduction in Peretz's copy, which tells how this book, that is the clavicula, was written by King Solomon himself and was discovered in a cave. Unlike Peret's own manuscript, Zachary also adds some notes of warnings concerning the practice that are brought in the book. And I quote, "This book is exceedingly valuable to those who know it and to those who are worthy of using it. However, anyone who comes to make use of any of its matters without first examining the Mishnah and the legal scholars carefully, whether it is permitted to use that thing in that manner or not, is a wicked person. He will surely die for his sin, his blood is upon his own head, and we are blameless for his sins." For in this book, and especially in the book of experiments, that is, recipes, there are things that no Israelite is permitted to perform, and they are not fit to be written except in order to understand and to use them for teaching purposes. And we have omitted those matters that, in our opinion, are certainly forbidden. And we have assigned them a place of their own so that no reader will stumble over them. But the matters that are permitted and those that are doubtful according to our limited judgment, we have not altered even a single letter in them, as befits any copies to copies from book to book, not to change, for perhaps the author's understanding was more complete than that of the copyist. All the more so with this book, which is attributed to Solomon, chief of the wise, of whom it is said, "And he was wiser than all men." And perhaps when the Lord expands our understanding and our bonds with colleagues and students, we will write on these matters a lengthy ruling concerning the permitted and the forbidden portions therein. The prefatory note is a halachic safety rail and some sort of a liability warning. It tells readers that this book is exceedingly valuable, but only for the worthy and only after checking each operation against halachic literature. Zachary adds a phrase that shifts responsibility to anyone who ignores the warning. It underscores spiritual and communal risk, deters casual dabbling, and absolves him. This is knowledge to study and teach, not a green light for performance without halachic consultation. You can try this at home, but do so at your own risk. After the legal preface, the manuscript tracks Peret's copy closely. Then, Zachary adds a major appendix, Sefer ha-ďOtot, the Book of Signs, a planetary pentacle collection. He calls them pentacles. This wasn't an afterthought. Peret, in his copy, had already envisioned such a book, and he even listed it among his planned works at the end of his own manuscript. However, Peret's own manuscript does not include this Book of Signs, or Book of Pentacles. It surfaces only in Zachary's copy, and in a few standalone manuscripts that seem to have circulated independently. Before turning to what this book actually contains, a quick note about scope. We cannot possibly cover every pentacles in Zachary's work in this lecture. We'll sample a few representative pieces to show the range of forms and functions. Zachary's Book of Signs follows the same planetary pentacles trend we met last time. Sets organized by the 7 planets, built upon astrological principles and designed to channel each planet's particular virtues. At the introduction of the Book of Signs, Zachary wrote, and I quote, "Sefer ha-ďOtot, which are the pentacles or pentagonus, they too came from the chief of the wise, King Solomon, peace be upon him. And how many wondrous and great things there are in them. And who is like the wise man who would come after the king, who has not yet come into being? For all wisdoms revealed and hidden were all disclosed to him. As scripture says, blessed is the one who has such things in his word, and who gave such a king to his people of Israel. He will look upon the afflicted and their toil and bring them out of the iron furnace, and he will bring them out from between the feet of the pig. He will lead them, He will carry them on eagle's wings, as on the day of their escape from the land of Egypt. And eye to eye they shall see when the Lord returns to Zion. Amen. May the Lord do so speedily in our days. And they, these pentacles, are altogether 58. In this preface, Zachary wraps his collection in classic Solomonic cloth from the chief of the wise, King Solomon, a branding that signals authority. At the same time, he quietly tips his hat to non-Jewish sources. The somewhat odd phrase from between the feet of the pig, alongside his prayer for Israel's redemption, reveals the mixed toolkit he openly acknowledges elsewhere in his introduction. Even his vocabulary maps the blend. He preserves the Latin and Italian labels pentacle or pentagonos, but renders the title in Hebrew as Sefer ha-ďotot, Book of Signs, with ot, sign, carrying its biblical double sense of a sign and a wonder. Thus, in Zachary's view, these pentacles are indeed of a foreign nature, since they survived in non-Jewish hands. As he puts it, they were, like Israel in exile, held elsewhere. His aim is to redeem them, recover what he sees as an originally Solomonic work, and bring it back into a Jewish language, audience, and frame. Finally, he tells us what the book contains and how he counts it. 58 items in all, 43 planetary pentacles, 14 more built from magic squares, and one extra he copied from what he calls a book of Spaniards, that is, a Spanish language source. Unlike what one might think about a copyist, Zachary did not only copy the pentacles he found. In the margins, he and Perets often commented on what they found, sometimes writing about technical difficulties in reading their source. See here, for example, how Zachary commented on the margins, and I quote, "This pentacle, I don't know if I made it right, since in the source it is confused and unclear." Zachary is very honest concerning his practice. And in one place where he added corrections outside of the pentacle, he wrote, and I quote, "I was wrong concerning everything I wanted to fix on this side." In some cases, Zachary negotiated what he saw in the sources with his own knowledge, especially when it comes to divine names. He also points to parallels when they are to be found and to alternative practices concerning the pentacles. From such comments, we can learn not only about Zachary's and Peret's sources, but also about what they saw as important in the pentacles. For example, it appears that aesthetics does matter, or at least some sort of precision. In this pentacle, for instance, Zachary added a comment regarding the form in which the word ma'adim, the Hebrew word for Mars, appears. And I quote, "The two heads should..." I'll mark these heads so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, this is one head and this is the second head. Okay, so the two heads should be equal, but due to a lack of space, the lower head was shortened. In a different pentacle, he exactly added a remark about the symmetry of its geometric shapes, noting that, and I quote, "the circle should touch the triangle on every side, and the triangle's base should be drawn more accurately, that is to say, a completely straight line." As we discussed earlier, the pentacles in Zachary's book are the planetary ones, that is, after the clavicula shifted from a small group of candarii to a huge collection of astrological related pentacles. It is clear that Zachary also saw this astral connection, which is expressed in different ways. First, At the very beginning, exactly listed the pentacles in his work, mentioning the planet that corresponds to them, while adding the astrological symbol representing this planet. This is the list. Saturn, there are 8 pentacles. Jupiter, there are 7. Mars, 6, etc., etc. Inside the book, exactly highlights this aspect, and you'll see it here. He tags each pentacle with the planet symbol. So on this folio that you can see here, there are 3 Jupiter pentacles marked with Jupiter symbol and 1 Mars pentacle marked with Mars symbol. After the planetary set, he adds 7 paired pentacles built from magic squares. Think of a magic square as a number grid where every row, column, and diagonal adds up to the same total. In learned magical tradition, each planet has its own square. So there are Jupiter squares, Mars squares, etc. Each pair shows the same square twice. Once with numbers, you can see it here, once with numbers, and once rewritten in Hebrew letters via gematria, the system that treats letters as numbers and vice versa. This linkage of squares and planets is very old and widespread. You'll find it, for example, in Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's De Occulta Philosophia. Exactly is clear about the aim. These are, and I quote, the 7 seals of the 7 planets. Each has its own virtue, as we will discuss. And, turn to the form, he can't resist a scholarly flourish. He slips in a parenthetical note signed with his initials, claiming a Cabalistic secret he sees hidden in the pattern, and I quote, "And the perceptive will understand that the herbs, the bird from which the feather comes, the material on which it will be engraved, and the color of the ink, all are assigned to the planet intended. And according to our way, we have learned that the 7 verses of the psalm for the leader with stringed instrument, that is Psalm 67, each correspond to one of the 7 planets. Go and learn how great the power of the Holy Torah is." Then he signed, Isaac Zekli HaKohen. According to the Kabbalistic tradition Zekli mentions, Psalm 67 is often written out in the shape of a 7-branched menorah, a layout you see on amulets, prayer books, and other forms. Each branch, that is, each verse, corresponds to one of the 7 classical planets. The image hints at 2 things. Just as the menorah lamps are lights, so too are the planets, the wandering lights of the sky. By tying each lamp or planet to a verse, together to this psalm, Zekli can say that this whole web of correspondences isn't a foreign import at all. It's already encoded in sacred text, giving his planetary pentacles a Torah-grounded tradition. Let's read about one of those to see what exactly Zekli meant by this passage and how he uses this Kabbalistic tradition to change the practice he translated into Hebrew. This is the passage concerning the first couple, which corresponds to Saturn. And I quote, "You shall write this ot," this sign, these pentacles, "on a plate of lead, with myrrh water mixed with the juice of an herb called ruta, using a feather of the ostrich, which is called struzzo, in Italian, ostrich, in Saturn's hour and on its day. After it dries, on another day, as noted above, that is, on another Saturn day, you shall engrave the letters that were written with the myrrh water and rue juice, with an iron stylus, while adjuring by the name of the angel of the day and of the week, and the day of the month, and the name of the angel of the season, and the name of the quarter of the world in which you will operate. After this, pass it through running water from a river or spring. Afterward, fumigate it with storax, myrrh, and pure frankincense. And at the time of the fumigation, say this verse, and I quote, God be merciful unto us and bless us, and cause his face to shine upon us, Selah. That is the second verse of Psalm 67. And exactly proceed. Its virtue, the virtue of this ot, this pentacle, is to find treasure hidden in the earth. And this is done by fumigating it at the place where the treasure is found or suspected. Place it on the suspected spot. If there is indeed a treasure there, the ground will immediately split without any harm, and you will be able to take it out without fear. It is also good and beneficial for a person to carry it upon him so that he does not fall into anger. It fortifies the power of the heart, strengthens the limbs, and is good for acquiring wisdom. The day on which you should perform it is the Sabbath, that is Saturday, the day of Saturn, the 1st and 8th hours. And its night is the night of Tuesday, the 1st and 8th hours. Its color is black. What you are hearing here is a classic Saturn operation built from standard correspondences you find across learned magical handbooks. Lead for Saturn's metal, black for Saturn's color, Saturday and Saturn's planetary hours for timing, and specific materials assigned to its influence. In other words, Zeckley isn't guessing. He's working within a well-known recipe shared by earlier Latin and Italian sources. What's distinctly his is the Jewish Cabalistic layer he stitches in. Earlier versions don't require recitation of the verse. Zeckley instructs the practitioner to recite the second verse of Psalm 67 during the fumigation, a verse that corresponds to Saturn according to the Cabalistic tradition he discussed earlier. It's a neat move that adds another layer to the practice itself. This isn't the only place where Zeckley tweaks or corrects his sources. In this very pentacle, he adds a line from Psalm 27 on the outer band. And I quote, to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. In Hebrew, the opening word Shivti of this verse can also be read as Shabtai, that is Saturn, which pushes the pentacle even further toward its planetary alignment. Look closely and you'll see the rest of the verse too, compressed into initials. That's a common technique in Jewish magic and Kabbalah. Verses are abbreviated or set into simple ciphers, either to voice the scripture in shorthand or to create a divine name from it. Exploring the manuscript, we meet other techniques as well. In the Pentacle of Venus, for example, the outer band carries a line from the Song of Songs, perfect for Venus love profile, of course, written in reverse. And the verse is, only one is my dove, my perfect one, the only one of her mother, the delight of her who bore her, etc., etc. At times, the letter strings are trickier to crack. In a lunar pentacle built around a magic square, used to safeguard sailors from drowning, you find this sequence of letters. You can see them in yellow. It's actually a compact rendering of a very apt verse from Isaiah that also appears in the outer side of the square. And I quote, when you pass through water, I will be with you. Through streams, they shall not overwhelm you. Remember, this is a square used to safeguard sailors. Another simpler method of ciphering names is using a different system of alphabet. not necessarily to keep the text a secret, but sometimes such systems were perceived as having magical properties themselves. Let us see one such system, which is also given and explained by Agrippa in his De Occulta Philosophia. Agrippa attributed this system to Kabbalists, and described it in these words, and I quote, "There is moreover another fashion amongst the Kabbalists, formerly held in great esteem, but now it is so common that it is placed among profane things, and it is this. The 27 characters of the Hebrew may be divided into 3 classes, whereof every one contains 9 letters. The first, Aleph to Tet, which are the seals or marks of simple numbers. The second has Yud to Tzadik, the marks of tens. The third had the other 4 letters with the 5 final by order, that is from Kuf to Taf, and the 5 final letters, which are marks of hundreds." And Agrippa also says, "They do now and then distribute these 3 classes into 9 chambers, whereof the first is of units, that is Aleph, Yud, and Kuf. The second is of twos, Bet, Chaf, and Resh. The third of threes, Gimel, Lamed, and Shin, and so of the rest. These chambers are framed by the intersection of 4 parallel lines, intersecting themselves into right angles, as is expressed in the following figure, and you can see the figure here. Based on the numerical value of the letters, they are then organized in this table from which different forms can be extracted. For example, the letter Aleph that appears in the right upper cell would look like that, these 2 intersected lines. The letter He in the center of the table will look like this square. But if the magician wishes to express the letter Nun, say, they will need to use the same form but add a dot above to show that this is not the first letter of the cell, but the second letter. If it is the third letter, another dot would need to be added. By that, we can write letters with these forms attributed, as we saw, to Kabbalists. Zachary is familiar with this system, and he feels comfortable enough to suggest corrections to the forms he saw in his source. In another pentacle that corresponds to Saturn, Zachary found this magic square written in this kind of writing. However, he spotted a problem with one of the letters and sketched a different version in the margins, noting, and I quote, "I think it should be like that." Agrippa's influence, not necessarily direct one, appears also in a common pentacle of Jupiter when, as we saw in the previous lecture, the seal of Jupiter appears as part of it. Sometimes, clear Kabbalistic concepts were added to the pentacles. For example, see this pentacle of Mercury, which is used to open locked doors. At the lower part of the pentacle, there are 4 words, Ben, Ma, Sag, and Ab. These four words represent concepts known especially in Lurianic Kabbalah, and each is a numerical value of different forms of writing the 4-letter name of God. This concept does not appear in the earlier pentacles, and it is undoubtedly a contribution of a copyist who saw the pentacles as fitting to this Kabbalistic notion, maybe in an attempt to strengthen their power. It might be Zachary himself who was familiar with Lurianic Kabbalah and also with magical practices that were attributed to Isaac Luria. For example, in a pentacle that contains the Sator Arepo square we met in previous lecture, Zachary added a comment in parentheses, and I quote, "Its power is against bad fortune, and in particular to subdue the pride of the spirits and to reduce their turmoil." And then he added in parentheses, "And I, Isaac Zachary, a Kohen, the copyist, found in one book in the name of Rabbi Isaac Luria Ashkenazi of blessed memory, that the inner square is for a woman during prolonged labor. It is beneficial or can be used for a woman during prolonged labor. But there, this Lurianic text, it has Sator with a taf instead of tet, and likewise tinit with two taf instead of tet. But I rely more on this book, that is Sefer ha-ďotot, which is more accurate, and surely an error occurred in that other book, attributed to Isaac Luria. The comparative approach runs throughout the work, and Zeckley adds alternative formulas whenever he deems it appropriate. He, and perhaps his source, also alters certain iconographic elements of the pentacles. The clearest case is this moon pentacle, which in other versions is typically shown as a lock or a closed gate. You can see it on the right. In Zeckley's versions, on the left, by contrast, it looks more like an open gate with an arc. This visual shift seems to flow directly from the biblical verse inscribed on the pentacle, which reads, and I quote, "Through open your gates, O Lebanon." The letter combination that appears under the arc also points to this, since it is the initial of the biblical phrase, and I quote, "Open the gates and let a righteous nation enter, a nation that keeps faith." Accordingly, this pentacle has the power to open closed gates. As we saw in previous lectures, the seal of Solomon, or in our case the pentacles, were sometimes perceived as apotropaic means to be used for healing. Such pentacles are also attested in Zeckley's work. For example, this pentacle, you can see it here, Zeckley described it as, and I quote, "for one possessed by a demon or a spirit," and he adds in parentheses, in another vision, "one harmed by demons," write the name of the afflicted person in the center of the pentacle, and immediately the demon or spirit will release him, and he will be healed. And so that it does not return, let the person carry it on him. Along the outer band of this pentacle, two phrases from Psalms are written in reverse. The first one is, "Let him be tried and convicted," and the second is, "Let an accuser stand at his right hand." Framed this way, the design clearly signals its exorcistic function. As we noted in earlier lectures, the seal of Solomon was widely understood as an instrument for driving out possessing spirits and restoring the afflicted. This pentacle echoes that tradition. Just as we saw on the Christian side, the Hebrew Book of Pentacles also underwent a demonizing, let's call it, makeover, and began to circulate on its own outside the clavicula. In one striking manuscript, the authorship is even reassigned, no longer King Solomon, but Rabbi Elazar of Worms, the famed medieval Ashkenazi pietist celebrated for wondrous deeds. Of course, Elazar did not write this treatise. He draws on 18th century non-Hebrew sources. But attaching his name works much like the Solomonic brand did elsewhere. It anchors the text in a respected rabbinic lineage, lends its cultural authority, and recasts it as acceptable, even pious, knowledge within Jewish circles. That Elazar of Worms was little known in Christian circles matters. Choosing him as the author looked like a deliberate move to make the text feel exclusively Jewish, unlike the Solomonic label, which traveled easily across Christian, Muslim, and Jewish worlds. In other words, the reattribution doesn't just domesticate the material, it narrows the audience on purpose, signaling this is ours, and distancing the work from the Solomonic context shared across religious lines. this is a clear attempt of reclaiming. Before we end, let's gather the threads. Over 4 meetings, we followed the seal of Solomon from legend to actual objects. From a wise king's ring that tames spirits, through late antique and medieval tales, to the clavicula Solomonis, where scattered figures were standardized into pentacles and put to work in carefully scripted ritual of summoning demons. Along the way, we noticed how this object borrowed the look and logic of monograms and how the seal became a portable credential, a visible claim to act with higher authority. From there, we stepped out of the magic circle and into the street. Early modern medical practitioners adopted the familiar word pentacle for remedies timed to the stars, while critics pushed back, worried about where legitimate medicine ends and demonic art begins. That public tug of war across universities, dictionaries, court records, and clinics shows the traffic running both ways. Ritual instruments turned into everyday amulets, and popular objects pushing scholars or even magicians to redefine their terms. In short, pentacle became a shared, contested label. Our final stop zoomed in on a Jewish case study. Yehuda Perets and his student Isaac Zekli collated Latin, Italian, and Spanish keys of Solomon, translated and edited them into Hebrew, added a book of signs with planetary sets, and framed the whole project with halachic caution. Sometimes the branding shifted too, reattributing a pentacle collection to Elazar of Worms, to anchor it in a Jewish lineage, while still drawing on a repertoire shared across religious lines. If there's a single takeaway, it's this. The Solomonic seal is not one object, but a moving conversation. Each age re-inscribed it with its own worries and hopes, leaving the pentacle as a compact record of how knowledge travels between text and tools, between communities, and between different kinds of practitioners. Thank you.